Certainly. Mrs. Sloan. Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Bays.
Here.
I'll now make a motion for the adoption of the agenda, April 16, 2019. Mrs. Johnson, all in favor? 7-0. We will now have student and community comments. If anyone would like to speak to us, we do have a 3-minute limit and would ask that you identify yourself for the record. Okay, maybe later. There's another opportunity. I just want to say welcome this evening. And we have a very big agenda of presentations this evening, not necessarily our agenda, so we're going to move right along. And I am going to turn this over to Mr. Kirkman for the certificates of excellence.
Thank you, Ms. Sloan. My favorite moment of the month, everyone. Today, I will be recognizing Paul D. Schreiber High School students who are being honored as award winners of the LISEF and JV-LISEF. And I'm sure you're all wondering, what is the LISEF and JV-LISEF? It's the Long Island Science and Engineering Fair. This is a competition for the most advanced high school projects. The participants in this fair have a chance to present to professionals in their subject areas from local universities, scientific institutions, and professionals in the field. This is an incredible honor, and because of that, please do not hold all applause. Please applaud very loudly as I read each name of the winners, first of the Long Island Science and Engineering Fair, and come on up if you're here in the room. Give it up for Zachary Gruber! Kushal Upadhyay. And next, the winners of the JV-LISEF. Give it up for Jamie Levin. And Dylan Lyman. Once again, Joseph Malconian. You don't have to come back up. Just wanted to get more applause for you because you showed up. Congratulations to all of them, and of course to their teachers as well, Tina Gallagher, John Chaneller, and Elizabeth Thomas. You guys rule.
Thank you. And I will now turn over to the superintendent for the Board of Schools.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. Going to keep my report very brief since we do have some a little bit more extensive discussion items tonight. So just really a reminder that the kindergarten orientation sponsored by Parent Council will be on Wednesday, May 1st at 7 o'clock in the Cecil Auditorium when we return back from the break. At this point, I'll just have Ms. Fennick give us the enrollment report.
Thank you, Catherine. As of yesterday, April 15th, we had 360 students enrolled in our kindergarten program. We are 2 students above our actual projected numbers. And as of April 10th, we had 5,508 students in the district. And last year at the same time, we had 500
information by Broderick regarding asbestos management. So,
Ms. Callahan, I'm just going to jump in real quick and make a motion for the minutes because I have to follow the rules or I get in trouble. So I'll make a motion for the approval of the minutes for March 26th, March 28th, and April 5th, 2019. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson, all in favor? 7-0. Thank you. And now we can go to budget.
Mary, I'm sorry, it's a little difficult to hear you. You might have to speak directly into the microphone. Hello?
All right, we do hope the batteries are good in this microphone.
And I will start again.
We did have extensive meetings this year, both in budget and facilities. I had some individual meetings with board members who wanted to learn more about the process, and we had our evening meetings. We began back in January, and since that time, we did reduce our staffing proposal, but at this time and since February, that number really has not changed. We are requesting funds for ENL teachers and a STEAM teacher at the Guggenheim School, a social studies teacher, and a special education teacher at the high school. That's a total of 4.1 additional staff. We are also proposing an additional administrator for the central office with the title of Assistant Superintendent for General Administration. We are requesting an information technology specialist and a cleaner for the new construction at Guggenheim and Manor Haven. And some several units for coaching at the high school and at the elementary school, the homework clubs at the elementary school, which were initially funded by the Education Foundation and which now the district is absorbing half of that cost. So our total staffing request is an additional $818,729. At our last board meeting, we had a gap of $270,000. For anyone who has not been here for this whole process, with the current tax levy limit laws, we create a budget, we determine how much money we are entitled to add to the tax levy. We look at all of our other revenues and we determine what the difference is. Initially, we had over $1 million gap. By the meeting of March 26th, we had brought that down to $270,000. In order to get to the $270,000, in a prior discussion, we talked about using interest income from our reserves to help reduce the gap. We were then the fortunate recipient of an additional $400,000 in state aid. And at that time, I did ask the Budget and Facilities Committee to reconsider whether they wanted to use that $108,000 or to leave it in revenues. Now, these are revenues that we haven't even actually generated yet. They should be generated as of June 30th. So using, for the purpose of discussion, $400,000 in additional state aid and not utilizing the $108,000 in our interest income, we were fortunate enough to not only eliminate our gap, but to have $20,000 left. And the Budget and Facilities Committee recommended that that $20,000 be put back into a budget and facilities code. It therefore brings our gap to zero, which has been our goal since last October. And that creates a budget increase of 2.96% and a levy increase of 2.88%. The 2.88 levy increase is our allowable levy increase for this year. And to try and keep things in perspective, in a larger, broader range, I have provided you with the cost per pupil for our surrounding districts for the last 2 years. Obviously, I can't give you 18-19 because 18-19 has not been completed yet, but among all of our peers going from Locust Valley down to Paris, we have the least expense per pupil at $27,219.64. I'm happy to answer any questions. I think we have met the goal that was set out at the beginning of the budget process. We have trimmed the instructional requests to those that we feel are the most essential. And up until this point, I do believe that we have had the consensus of the board going along to get to this point.
Not really a question, but I would like to publicly thank Assemblyman Durso and Senator Kaplan for the extra $400,000. It brings our total increase over last year to about $1 million, which is still less than we deserve, but a lot more than we expected. And I think it's great that they're both really working on our behalf, and I just wanted to get that on the record. So if you hear from them, thank them for us.
I totally agree, Mr. Greenstone.
Thank you. Dr. Mooney just reminded me, we did send them a letter on behalf of the board and superintendent and central administration and community, so I'm glad to be reminded of that. And I just also wanted to thank Mary Callahan and her staff once again, because the hard work on the budget is year-round. It just becomes more public certain times of years than others. And thank the Budget and Facilities Committee, that there was a lot of hard work this year, and other board members not on the committee took a lot of your time going through a lot of line items and a lot of questions and really digging for this money. And I think that I'm very proud of this budget. I think we're bringing it in under the tax cap levy or at the tax cap levy. Thank you, Mr. Russo. It is at the tax cap levy, and we're still hiring staff, and we're still advancing the district, and we're overseeing our facilities to the best possible extent. And I think it's a great budget, and I'm proud that tonight we'll be voting on it and hopefully ratifying it and put it up to the community for vote. So thank you. Does the community have any questions or comments at this time if they'd like to step up to voting about the budget before we move on to the asbestos discussion?
takes me a few seconds to get adjusted to the mic.
If I could take just a moment to
Sure.
introduce you, Mr. Broderick. The gentleman before you is Brendan Broderick of J.C. Broderick. They are our asbestos consultants and have worked with us for a number of years. Mr. Broderick is going to give you a brief history of asbestos. People laughed at me when I said I was very surprised to hear that there was clothing made with asbestos back in BC, but you're going to hear that. And then we're going to quickly move to the district's individual asbestos management plan, which is required by the EPA, the steps that we take on a semi-annual basis and an annual basis and every 3 years. So, Mr. Broderick, thank you.
Thank you so much. Again, Brendan Broderick, J.C. Broderick and Associates, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to come in and discuss the plan with you. A lot does go into it, so it's always a benefit when the community understands actually what it takes. Just a quick side story. It's coincidence what happened on Friday. I have a couple of daughters, but my 16-year-old, she's a sophomore in high school. And she came into me, she said, "Dad, do you know we have asbestos in our school building?" And I said, "Yes, actually I do know, but why is this coming up?" And she said that, "Well, today in class, somebody brought up that we have asbestos in our buildings, and now not only do we not have air conditioning, but now we're breathing in asbestos fibers." So I said to her, I was like, "Are you concerned? Is it something you're scary about?" And she says, "I am a little scared, but I'm not that scared about it." So naturally, I took this opportunity to use her to help me put this presentation together, to educate her at the same time. So if you see any spelling errors or grammatical errors, it's because my daughter did that. All right, I got to click here. All right, and so the hope is that I did with her is that I hope that after this, that it can alleviate any concerns that people have when they understand that they have asbestos in the building. And unfortunately, in order to do that, I do go back to a little bit of a history on asbestos so everybody can understand. Because typically when we hear the word asbestos, we all imagine somebody wearing a 7-layer hazmat suit, cleaning up some spill that we, again, man-made spill that contaminated the planet, and now we're left in our generation to clean it up. That's not the case. Actually, asbestos is not man-made. It's actually a naturally occurring mineral. It's actually a group of 6 different naturally occurring minerals that are different than others in the sense that although they look like a rock, when they're compressed, when you separate it, it actually comes down to a bundle of tiny fibers. There's 6 different types. Chrysotile is part of what we call the serpentine group. That's the most common that we're going to find in the United States because that's actually mined here in North America. The other types, amosite, percentolite, tremolite, ethophylite, these are less common in the United States because they're mined in South Africa. So they used to call it the miracle fiber because it had a lot of characteristics. One is that they do not evaporate or dissolve. They can remain suspended in air for long periods of time. You can travel very far when the wind is running the water. They don't generally break down and can remain virtually unchanged in the environment for a long period of time. These characteristics made it resistant to heat, chemical, biological degradation, and as a result, this material was favorable to be used in a lot of common products. So the asbestos fiber, the history part, has been around a long time. Archaeologists have discovered debris from the Stone Age 750,000 years ago where they found asbestos fibers. The slaves used to use them for lamps and candles back in 5000 BC with the mines. And then again, we mentioned that it was actually used in clothing and woven cloths back in the Roman times. Actually, one famous one was Charlemagne, where they, after eating, he would take the tablecloth and the napkins, throw it in the fire, and try to impress his guests that he had some powers that they wouldn't burn. So that's the history part. More common uses was that it was being used back in the 1600s, 1700s commonly, and to the fact that in 1887 we first opened our first mine in North America. And then by 1930, it became the most common construction material in the United States. By the 40s, it was soared in usage on all different manufactured products. And then by 1980, it was used in over 3,000 building products, or commercial products, not even just building products. That's a lot. Think about it. It's 3,000 different types of materials and products that it was used in. Common products that you might not be aware of, again, fireproof fabrics and clothing. So if you have your oven mitts, maybe if you have your grandmother's oven mitts or one that you had when you were a kid, odds are asbestos fibers are woven in. It's still used today in a lot of firefighting clothing, so it was very commonly used in clothing in the past. It was mixed with vermiculite. So if anybody did potting soil, we all know what vermiculite looks like. So the vermiculite either contained asbestos or it was contaminated with asbestos because vermiculite was mined in the same mines that Libby, Montana, as the asbestos fibers were. Other things, vehicles, not just cars or planes, trains, all used it in different clutches and our gaskets and our brake pads. For a number of years, it was used in our brake pads because the tensile strength of the fiber made the brake pads last an extreme longer time than anything else. But we all commonly think about it mostly in our building products. And the building products was vast. As a matter of fact, if you looked at a building product, it's easy to say that if your house or a structure was built before 1990, there's an 85 to 90% chance that asbestos-containing materials was used in its construction in some part. It's actually very rare to try to find something that was built in that time period that doesn't have asbestos. And again, it was used in 3,000 different products. I mean, what building product would not benefit from better tensile strength, being fireproof, and being insulated, being electrical proof? So it was used from everything from the top of the roof shingles, the roof paper, the linings in the chimney, attic insulation. Most of us think about insulation as just thermal system like on your boilers or hot water tanks or your pipes. It was also used in our floor tiles, in the gypsum board compound. It was used in just about every material. Actually, growing up in Nassau County, as most of us, even on our houses, most of our houses either had that transite shingle siding, that cement shingles on the outside growing up, or a stucco. And both of those building components contained asbestos fibers. So asbestos is common in our daily environment. Almost daily, we are exposed to some prevailing level of asbestos fibers in the buildings or experience some existing level of asbestos in our outdoor air. The asbestos minerals are widespread. So we got to remember, if we're asbestos, we're finding it in debris since the Stone Age, being used all through the 1600s, 1700s, manufactured, it's being mined in our brake pads. If anybody sat in the LIE, you can imagine how many fibers would be released. They don't break down, they go out into the air, so that they are naturally occurring in our environment. So we do have concentrations of background asbestos throughout our day-to-day routine, and this is provided to us from either naturally occurring source, because it is a natural part of our geology, and the wearing down and disturbance of manufactured products. So the good news is that the low levels of fibers that we identify present very little or no risk at all as far as detecting, even though we detect them in our air samples, of providing any kind of disease towards us. So to put it more in perspective, I just wanted to start this, is to kind of show you some statistics. So the Department of Health, the United States Department of Health and Human Services, has a subdivision called the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. And basically their responsibility is to identify all toxic substances and come up with characteristics and details about it, and also diseases and what we believe the causes are. So in the handout for the board, I brought a copy of that ASDR for asbestos, and basically that's where all these facts are coming from. So how do they determine it? They say a cubic meter is about the amount of air that we breathe in an hour. So if you're going to measure the amount of air that a typical adult would breathe in an hour, it comes out to 1 cubic meter. So the ATSDR reports that 10 fibers are typically present in a cubic meter of air in a rural area. So that means if you're sitting in a rural area in some rural state, and you sat out there for an hour, there's a good chance you're breathing in upwards of 10 fibers per hour. In a city or suburban area, you're looking at about 100 fibers per hour. And then obviously if you're in a manufacturing plant or a mining city, such as up in Libby, Montana, or Asbestos, Canada, you could be breathing in upwards of 10,000 fibers an hour. So what they've determined is that concentrations measured in homes, schools, and other buildings that contain asbestos can include a range, if detected, somewhere between 30 to 6,000 fibers per hour. So the point I'm trying to bring with these statistics is that we are breathing, everybody in this room has breathed in asbestos fibers and will continue to breathe in asbestos fibers. Is that supposed to be should that cause us a concern? As it is, so we're going to start with that asbestos fibers can cause asbestos-related diseases, including cancer. So asbestos is designated as a carcinogen. And as a carcinogen, any carcinogen, there is no established safe level. Because although asbestos is hazardous, the risk of asbestos is related to the disease depends upon the exposure to airborne fibers, how much we breathe it in. And it's what we call a dose-related response, which means the more asbestos that you breathe in a lifetime, the more likely you're going to determine result in an asbestos-related disease. But the good news is that the average airborne asbestos levels in buildings seem to be very low, so therefore, accordingly, the health risk to most building occupants also appears to be very low. So, well, we always hear about the asbestos, everything coming down with asbestosis or mesothelioma, and it's important to note that to recognize that the majority of people who have developed diseases because of asbestos exposure are former asbestos workers. These are individuals who are exposed to past levels during a work week through an entire career of being exposed to fiber concentrations as high as 5 million fibers per hour, or what we refer to today when we measure as 5 fibers per cubic centimeter. So the NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and OSHA, who implements safety levels, enforces about 100,000 fibers per cubic meter, or what we refer to as 0.1 fibers per cubic centimeter. So again, what this is saying is that we've all breathed in asbestos fibers, we always will be. It's naturally occurring in our environment. But the studies have shown it's when the people who are exposed to 5 million fibers per hour is the ones that are resulted who have determined to have resulted in asbestos diseases. So the safe limit, or what the allowable limit for the OSHA is 100,000 fibers per hour, or 0.1 fibers per cubic centimeter. But now we're talking about full-grown adults. So what does that mean for children? The limited studies that have been performed indicate that there's no indication that younger people might develop asbestos-related diseases any more quickly than older people or adults. And studies also suggest that any effects to fetuses, there are no effects to fetuses through the mother's exposure. So this is one of those rare diseases because children are constantly still being developed, their lungs are still growing, that typically when they're exposed to a chemical, they have a higher concern rate than we do. But when it comes to asbestos, it appears to be the same whether it's an adult or a child. So with that, the asbestos, they have established the school districts when they come out with their standards, both at the federal level, the EPA, and at the state level. They assess what they call a clearance level, which is basically a hazardous asbestos exposure level in schools. So the clearance level is established by the EPA is 70 structures per millimeter squared, which is a volume equation. But when we convert that to the same concept of how many per hour, we would come out to about 22,000 fibers an hour, or 0.002 fibers per cubic centimeter. So that level, that's established by the EPA. And on a state level, New York being one of the most stringent states with regulations of asbestos, they have theirs down to about 10,000 fibers an hour. So when you're thinking about 10,000 fibers an hour, that sounds like a lot. And I did miss a picture here. So 10,000 does seem a lot, but keep in mind, that's less than 0.5% of that 5 million that a worker would be exposed to, that we have to be concerned about. I don't think this, I meant to point on this picture here, where we're talking about asbestos fibers. That penny, if you look at that little white discoloration, those are grains of ice. That the circle shows a hair, but that little circle right by Lincoln's nose, that little, within that space include over 20,000 fibers in that little space. So when you're thinking about that in perspective of 22,000 fibers in the air. So the federal government has established, now with that said, it is a dose-related response, so the goal is not to sit there and say asbestos is not a concern. Obviously that's not the case. The goal is to minimize, that the reality is that you can't create an asbestos-free environment. It just doesn't exist. So, but the idea is to minimize the amount of exposure to as little as possible. So the EPA established a ban for asbestos in 1989. Kind of a known fact a lot of people aren't aware of is that asbestos is not illegal in the United States. They tried to ban it in 1989. It was turned around. It was limited to only new products can't contain asbestos. New uses. So there was a use for asbestos in brake pads, roofing cement, pipe insulation before 1989. That is still allowed to be used today. Any new methodology or new products cannot have it. So asbestos is not, it's regulated in the United States, but it's not banned. EPA does regulate any buildings that are being demolished or being renovated, that because of doing that work, that they're disturbing building products. It's a NESHAP, we call National Emission Standards, as it's air pollutants. That's required to notify the EPA to take special precautions to minimize the release of asbestos fibers. In our drinking water, we have a limit of 7 million fibers per liter in drinking water, so we're allowed to have that much, 7 million fibers in our drinking water. The FDA does regulate the use of asbestos in preparation of drugs and restricts the use of asbestos in food packaging materials. And last but not least, is 40 CFR Part 763, the Asbestos Hazardous Emergency Response Act. That went into effect and signed in 1986 by Ronald Reagan, went into effect in 87. That required every school building in the United States to do an inspection of the buildings for the presence of asbestos-containing materials and then to implement an asbestos management plan. So that's the law that's required from us. So schools are kind of, everybody relates asbestos-containing materials to schools. And the reason why it is because the school buildings in the United States are the only buildings, the only structures in the United States that are required to maintain an asbestos management plan. So obviously that's why we always associate asbestos with schools, because we're not required to do an asbestos management plan or test our homes. And remember, the schools is anything from kindergarten to 12th grade. So any preschool, nursery, not included, hospitals, colleges, health clubs, movie theaters, supermarkets are not required to maintain an asbestos management plan, only the schools. So also in your package, the asbestos management plan. This is 40 CFR Part 763. I give you, this is a nice little cheat sheet, I always call it, that the EPA puts out. So if you were to Google asbestos in schools, odds are you would come up with this document. And it's a pretty good document. The law is quite voluminous, but this gives you a nice summary of what's required from the school districts to manage asbestos. So if you want to follow along on that, you're more than welcome to do so. So the asbestos management plan is that the EPA has determined that an asbestos-containing material will pose little risk if it's well maintained under an asbestos management plan. So they require a proactive, in-place management program for any known or assumed asbestos-containing materials. And the purpose of the AP is, again, to minimize the exposure of all building occupants to asbestos fibers. It consists of a set of procedures and practices in operating and maintaining the building as clean as possible and as free of asbestos contamination as possible. The EPA at this point made a recommendation back in 1988 that it only requires the removal of asbestos to prevent significant exposure to airborne asbestos fibers during building demolition or renovation activities. So the EPA actually states, and they still do today, that it's better off to keep a building material that's asbestos in your building in good condition than to try to do an asbestos abatement, because the potential is that during the disturbance of the removal, that you have more of a potential of an asbestos exposure than if you maintain that material in place in good condition. So with that, they came up with requirements of their management plan. So the first one was that there had to be an original inspection that was done back in 1988. Here in Port Washington, that was done by a company called Environmental Compliance. And what they did is they went into each one of your school buildings and they identified each functional space. So functional space would be not only the classroom, but the closet inside the classroom would get its own assigned ID number. The bathroom, the plenum, the space above the ceiling, the crawl space. So for instance, in this auditorium, the auditorium proper would be a functional space, and then the stage would be its own functional space. So they went around into each building, created a map, identified each functional space, assigned each functional space an ID number. Then the inspector, the accredited inspector, would go in and identify all suspect asbestos-containing materials within that space. They would list it, quantify it, and then perform an assessment on the condition of those materials. The suspect materials would be either analyzed by a laboratory to determine asbestos content, or it would be assumed as being asbestos, and all these materials were put into an asbestos management plan, with the management plan and recommendation of either remove it, repair it, or maintain it in the operations and maintenance plan or the asbestos management plan. So yours was done back in 1988. This is a little snapshot of it. So again, on the left, you're going to see a little section of one of your school buildings, I believe it's here in the high school, where each space is assigned a ID number, a functional space ID number. And on the right, again, we're talking about 1988 here, so we don't have nice graphics. But if you notice, on the left column, there's going to be a space ID number. Then over to the right, they're listing all the suspect materials. They quantify it, they identify its condition, and then ultimately whether or not it tested positive or negative for asbestos. So this was completed for the Washington School District just as well as every other school district in the country back in 1988. The management plan, so that's the start of the management plan, what we call the original inspection. And then the management plan required that a designated person be identified. So the local educational agency, which we refer to here in New York as a school district, was required to identify a specific person that was going to be in charge of this health management plan, to implement the management plan. That person did not need to be accredited, in other words, did not have to be licensed to certify, but did require to show that they did have proof of training. And the training brought up these specific topics regarding asbestos. The training typically lasts about 2 to 4 hours, but again, the person does not need to be accredited. Every 3 years, we have to do a complete re-inspection of the school buildings. All right, the re-inspection is going to update changes in conditions. So from the last re-inspection 3 years ago, did we remove any asbestos? Did we test any new materials that were assumed? Did we reclassify anything? We'd have to update that original inspection. Changes in functional spaces. Did we have an addition to the building? We need to add that. Did we add a classroom? Did we cut a classroom into 2? Did we make a larger library? All those changes would have to be reflected in the floor plan. Account for changes in laboratory methodologies. Everybody thinking back at 1988, our phones compared to our cell phones today. There's been a lot of advancement, not only in our cell phones and our day-to-day, but also in laboratory technologies. So back in 1987, if somebody was to test a floor tile for asbestos, they would use the testing methodology called polarized light microscopy. Somewhere around 1993, they decided that that methodology wasn't good enough. We also have to analyze that floor tile by transmission electron microscopy. So the idea is that everything that we said was negative in 1987 by that PLF method, we have to now say is inconclusive or assumed again unless we test it by TM. These changes occurred a couple of times throughout the years: the floor tiles, the ceiling tiles, plaster, etc. So we have to take that into account every 3 years. So we have to go back to the original plan and to see how the material was originally tested. Other considerations such as vermiculite. Vermiculite is not commonly used as insulation in school districts, but it was used in plaster as a constituent of plaster. So we have to go back and retest all the plaster inside the school building to see not only that there was no asbestos, but was there any vermiculite? Because if there was vermiculite, then we have to consider asbestos. And what materials might have been missed by the original inspector back in 1987. So we have to do a re-inspection to make sure there's no missed materials. And then also, over the last 30 years, we've identified new materials that contain asbestos. For instance, fire doors, insulations inside doors, terrazzo flooring, caulking, glazing. Over the last 30 years, these materials became known to be asbestos containing, and we had to add that to the inspection. And then last but not least, everything that was previously identified to do a new physical assessment on it and identify if there's any damage. The damage is, this is kind of important because it seems like a little cluttering of language up there. But ultimately, we have to, as the inspector, in accordance with the HERA regulations, categorize the damage into one of these 7 categories. So we have to pick one of these 7 categories. We can't make up our own. And basically, if you look at it, it's basically doing 3 things. First, we're deciding, is it thermal system insulation, something that's on a pipe, surfacing like a plaster, or miscellaneous? So we categorize which type of material it is. And then we make a determination, is it damaged or significantly damaged? If we identify something as not being damaged or significantly damaged, then we have to assess its potential for damage. And then based upon the accredited inspector's determination, we classify one of these 7 categories. Now, once we have these 7 categories, the most important one I have bonded up there is something damaged or significantly damaged. What is the definition? How do we make that determination? So in the HERA regulations, they have damages, deterioration or sustained physical damage such that the internal structure, the cohesion of the material is inadequate or has delaminated such that the bond of the substrate adhesion is inadequate. In other words, what they're looking for, has that material sustained significant damage that it lacks its fiber cohesion or adhesion qualities. In other words, is the asbestos fibers that's mixed in with that building material, which sometimes could be as little as 2, 3, 4% of that building material, are these asbestos fibers leaving the material becoming airborne? Because ultimately that's what we're concerned about. Is the asbestos fibers leaving the material becoming airborne where we can breathe it in? So the best way to make a determination, the best way to determine something would be to collect an air sample and see if we're finding asbestos in the air from the damage that's caused by that building material within that functional space. Since that's not practical to do on every single space, every time of reinspection, they have given us guidelines for visual determinations. And basically we have that damage and significant damage, and then the other option, good condition. So they have good condition or minor damage as a building material with no visible damage or deterioration, or is showing only very limited damage or deterioration. Under the EPA's definition, that's something that's in good condition or sustaining only minor damage. Damage is consistent again with a fiber release, where it's typically is described as consists of the falling or dislodging of more than 3 square feet or linear feet of fibrous asbestos. So when we're looking at an area and we see a 3 square feet or 3 linear feet dislodged or fallen, we would consider that to be damage. Significant damage is just that. It is significant damage. Significant damage in the preamble to the ERA identified as damage that is distributed across 10%, so evenly distributed across an area, a functional space of 10%, or a functional space that's localized with 25% of the functional space. So again, that's a lot of damage, and that's what they have identified, something significant damage that can be a meaningful release of asbestos fibers where we could be exposed to more than the hazardous exposure concentration that they assign to us. So just in a room like this, when you're talking about 25% of the ceiling plaster, for instance, we're talking about one of these entire piers. So that's a significant amount of damage that has to occur to result in a meaningful amount of asbestos exposures. So this is an example, actually this is your re-inspection, it's a page from your re-inspection. So we're not accredited, once again, we've got a re-inspector doing the re-inspection, the school district has to retain an accredited company, a licensed company. And we do the same thing, we go back into the original plan that we had for the school, we take a look at the ID numbers, the functional space ID numbers, we inspect each one of those spaces and identify all suspect materials. We identify the quantity, determine what category it's in, and then ultimately if it's asbestos, non-asbestos, or assumed. It's kind of hard to see with this, but if anything that says assumed or asbestos or non-asbestos, we're actually referring to the actual report number or the report ID number of that information, whether it's been abated or whether it's been tested and determined to be asbestos or non-asbestos. So this re-inspection is done every 3 years. So it started in 1980, I think the first one was 93, 95, 98. The last one was due in 2006, was completed in 2016. The next one, I believe, for the school district is due in July of 2019, July of this year. Now we're back to the management, but what else is required of the school districts? Once a year, the school district's not only required to do all this, but they're required to notify the public that the management plan is available for their review and that they're implementing it and giving directions on where to go if they want to see a copy of it. The school district has opted for about the last 25 years to include this in their calendar. So this is a copy of the 2014-2015 school year. In the pages with the other announcements, you'll see the annual asbestos notification. So this is, again, something that's done once a year. In addition to this, the school district also maintains the notification on the website. The next part of the management plan is that 3 years is a long time to do it, where we do a complete re-inspection. So every 6 months in between, the designated person is to assure the implementation of what we call a periodic surveillance. So the periodic surveillance is not as detailed as that re-inspection, but basically what it does is it does require somebody to walk around, look at all the confirmed or assumed asbestos-containing materials, and see if there's any significant changes in condition. This does not have to be done by an accredited person. This could be done with somebody with very little training, such as the training that's required by the maintenance personnel. So again, this is not something that has to be done by accredited training, but it has to be done every 6 months. And the purpose is to record whether there are any changes in condition in the material. The whole purpose of the management plan is to make sure and minimize the potential for asbestos release. So obviously that can occur through deterioration, is what the reinspection and the surveillances account for. But also we want to avoid any disturbance of the material. So the disturbance of the material can result in the release of asbestos fibers. And who's most likely going to do that is that the EPA required that the custodian and maintenance staff also be trained on where the location is asbestos. So within a couple of months, I think it's 2 months of each hire, any new custodian maintenance worker is typically taken aside and given training. The training not only goes over the health effects of asbestos identification, but also encourages them and teaches them how to use the district's management plan and identify where asbestos is so that, one, they don't accidentally disturb it, but two, if they're aware of where the asbestos is, if they see a bad condition or a changing condition, they can bring it to the designated person's attention. In addition to the custodian maintenance staff, we have what we call short-term workers. So this would be any contractors that come into the site. Now, any large bond project or capital project where you retain an architect, typically they'll work with a firm like ours, where we'll go through and identify to them based upon their scope of work, whether it's a roof, boiler, classroom flooring, we'll go around and identify what materials are asbestos. That gets put into the architect's plans and arrange for abatement when necessary. But anybody that comes in between that, plumbers, contractors, security alarm companies, anybody doing smaller projects, we have to notify them where asbestos is. The school district has a policy in place of where they do that 3 ways. One is on the issuance of every purchase order. There's a little bit of a blurb on the bottom right in the middle there, just like you see on the calendar, advising the contractor that there's getting materials and they have to review the management plan. Once a year, the designated person also sends out a special letter, a specific letter, going out to each of the approved contractors in the district, again, reminding them that they have asbestos inside the building and that they should know where it is before they disturb any building materials. And last but not least, there's a sign-in sheet for these contractors as they come in. Even us, even our firm, when we walk in, have to go to the sign-in, which identifies that we've reviewed the management plan and that we're aware where the asbestos is. And last but not least is that all of this material for the last 30 years, every bulk sample, every air sample, every calendar, every sign sheet, every training, the original inspection, all the re-inspections, the surveillances, are required to be maintained as part of this record-keeping requirements of this law. So if you can imagine on a district this size, with that amount of material, that's quite a voluminous document. So, I think we're done here. I think my separate here, I have my partner in front of me. About 2010, about 10 years ago, we got retained by the school district because of the volume of documents and needing to access each individual sample. For instance, every time somebody wants to look at something, we may have to go back to that 1988 report to see if something was tested. We actually embarked on a system where we scanned all the school district documents. That we were able to take every asbestos-related document since 1988 and put it in the management plan. So this document here is the actual physical management plan. So this document this is the Port Washington Union Free School District Management Plan. And basically what this document does is highlights the policies that we have in place to manage it. For instance, when we talked about the contractor notification, this document is available, obviously, in the designated person's office, but a copy of this document is also maintained in the main office of every school building. So you can see here, it's identifying each of the school buildings throughout the district that have it. It basically includes what we're doing. This identifies all the re-inspections we're done. And this document basically gives you and explains to everybody who's looking at it what the policies are. On the cover of this document, the binder is a disc. It's a DVD disc, which has all the paperwork associated with it. So all the record-keeping requirements, starting with the designated person, again, for following along. The first one was the original inspection. So this includes all the original inspection material since from 1988 for every school building in the district. So that's all being maintained on those documents. Then we have the designated person. Again, reminding everybody that the designated person does not have to be accredited. They're not required to have training. They're just required to have a 4-year certificate, 4-hour certificate, which they can get when they first receive the appointment. So in this one, we'll show them that the designated person, Mr. Rostano, is actually elected to become accredited. And not only is it a week accreditation class, but it does have to get renewed and re-accredited every year. So one of the important things is about this position is how it ages you. But again, he's got, so in addition, so he's taking it very seriously. Instead of just taking a 4-day class, a 4-hour class, he's taking a week class and gets accredited every year. You'll also see before him was Eric Vandenhorst, his accreditation is on there as well. The next one is the re-inspections. Is that where we're at?
Yes.
Yeah, the re-inspections. The re-inspection, so if you looked at that file, we have re-inspections from 1995, 1998, so on and so on. This is an example of what your re-inspection, and this is a useful document. In other words, this is listing all the location of all the asbestos. How it's used is that if we're using the same maps that we used when it was originally started, the maps were created in 1993. And if I'm a custodian or a maintenance worker or a contractor and I'm interested in doing work and I want to know what's asbestos in my building, in your building, I'll find my spot of where we're existing on that map. So for instance, I'm looking, that would be the auditorium there. I can't see the number, but does that say 1001?
Yes.
Okay, so 1001. Then you go into our Form 1, our Form 2, and you're going to be looking at this, the Form 2, and it's listing every single space inside the district. And it's giving you an ID number. So once you write, and the reason why they used the numbers was because they were pretty smart, that in 1988, the attendance office might now be a psychologist's office, so somebody might renumber the classrooms. Or we might divide a classroom into 2 or build 2 classrooms into 1. So that's why they use the map, so that you can go to the map, identify it, and you'll see the space ID number, and then next to it, if I'm reading it right, it says the auditorium. So that's what's telling us in the space that we're in right now, what's asbestos. So we'll list it, and you'll see floor tile and mastic. So obviously, there's no floor tile and mastic here, but if you look, it says that was abated by Roy F. Weston in 1996. So we go back to the activity record keepers, and we can actually find that report to say where it's abated. So this correlates. What's important is that this document correlates with that 1988 document. It said the coal base was removed too. We have wall plaster, and that wall plaster is listed as non-asbestos, and it references a report ID number. And again, so now we know that the wall plaster in this room is not asbestos. We wanted to get that test data. We go to the record keeping and identify that report, and we have that available to us. Ceiling plaster, again, was tested, determined non-asbestos. The only thing we do have assumed would be the fire doors. Like, in other words, these doors have to be fire rated. We suspect that they meet that rating by some type of insulation inside it. We're not going to drill through it, because there's no reason to do that, so we have it down as assumed. But this is a work and viable document that is relied upon by the maintenance staff and custodians, also short-term contractors and architects and their consultants when we're doing some type of work to know where the asbestos is. So this is done every 3 years, this re-inspection, which accounts for everything and correlates with 1987. Like I said, the next one is due. Let's jump to the record keeper. Jump down to the record keeper. Basically, we keep track of each one of those folders is explaining or showing, is demonstrating a response action, some type of asbestos activity, whether it be bulk sampling or an asbestos abatement, whether it be a large one or a small one. And we're required to maintain all these documents for every project. So I don't know if we want to pick one and open up a. So this looks like it's an abatement project. So for every asbestos abatement project, we're required to name all the required documents in accordance with the year. So this looks like it was a project that was performed at the Weber Middle School. This is kind of more boilerplate. It identifies the requirements of what we have. But everybody on every abatement job, air monitoring must be performed. So this would be a copy. This happens to be a copy of our license. If you look at the top, we have a restricted license, meaning we're not allowed to remove the asbestos. That's what a restricted license means as a consultant. So we have to be a licensed company, J.C. Broderick, and then any of the air sampling technicians or project monitors that are listed here, they have to be certified. So we keep their certification activities information there. This company license also has to be maintained by the abatement contractor. So before the job starts, we want to make sure that the contractor is properly licensed. license. So this is a contractor called Candor Solutions. Again, you'll see his license class is full, so which means he's allowed to remove the asbestos. That work can only be done by certified handlers. During the abatement project, we make sure that each handler, we take see a copy of their license, transcribe their information, make sure it's valid, and identify what days that they were present. Another document we have to keep is the removal verification form. So at the end of the abatement, we're identifying what materials, what asbestos-containing materials were removed. And this is an important document because this has to correlate with our management plan. So the idea is that we're giving this to the next accredited inspector when they do the surveillance and the inspection so they can document exactly from what space, what material, what was removed and how much of it was removed. Building notification prior to any asbestos abatement. There's a notification that's put on the front door, identifies what material is being removed, where it's being removed from, where it starts, who the abatement contractor is, who the air monitoring firm is, and then who the third-party air sampling or laboratory analytical lab is, and that would be in this one. So we maintain a copy of that notification. In addition to notifying the building occupants during an asbestos abatement job, we also have to notify the New York State Department of Labor in advance, as well as the Environmental Protection Agency. So we have to, based on the size of the project, it makes a determination which agency or which both of the agencies that we have to notify. We keep copies of those notifications. This notification is put in by the contractor. During the job, as the air monitoring and project monitoring company, if we see anything of concern, if we collect an air sample that we're unhappy about, we actually notify the Department of Labor about it, so we can keep them apprised of the progress of the project. So we send these emails out to the Department of Labor during the abatement, advise them on the progress, and then that again makes a determination whether or not they want to send an inspector out. We maintain copies of those as well. Waste transporter, obviously waste transportation disposal certificates, we keep copies. Whoever takes the waste away, they have to have a permit. Wherever they dump it, they have to have a permit to receive it. So that's usually in Pennsylvania somewhere. So it doesn't get dumped in New York anymore, but that gets taken to the proper landfill. We maintain copies of that. So all of this documentation, we don't do this, I always get joked about that we charge by the inch now. That's why we have to have state reports, but it's not, every one of these documents have to be maintained, and then at the end of closeout, it does take us some time to put them together, so typically we do what we call a clearance letter, where we send the letter out to you to say that the air has been cleaned and cleared, and that the full report is forthcoming. And then during the project itself, we take an enormous amount of air sampling. All right, air sampling is performed prior to the job starting. It's performed while they're prepping the containment area. It's performed during the containment area. And then last but not least, it's done when we're clearing the containment area. So the sampling is done in strict accordance with what we call New York State Industrial Code 56. This represents a chain of custody which identifies each sample, where we're collecting it from, where we turned it on, what the flow rate was started at, what it ended at, what the total volume is. And then we take this, and at the bottom you'll see a chain of custody. It says who signed it, who delivered it to the lab, who received it at the lab, and who analyzed it at the lab. Keeping in mind the lab is a different company, it's an independent. And then they'll come out and actually produce a written report identifying the concentration and results of each of the samples we collected. So we'll go through, as you can go through this one, you'll see an enormous amount of sampling that's done during different projects. Well, we also include a map of exactly where we collect the samples that reflect the same functional spacing units as all the units. So this goes through, we take, like I said, we do it for the pre's, the durings, the posts, and then ultimately, before the space can get reoccupied by the school, or we open it up, it has to clear what we call a final or clearance sampling. I can use an example. So you can see the denotation of the F on the side, that means it's what we call a final. The same thing, we sample it. And in this case, when we sample this one, those first 5 samples are inside the work area, the second 5 samples are outside. And you can see the 5 samples inside overloaded, in which case that they actually failed the first time we took samples in that room. So the contractor had to come back, re-clean the area, and we had to come back and take another sample. So I'm going to speed through it, but ultimately, if you keep going through it, I'm looking at it again, it looks like this job they failed twice before we allowed them to break down the containment area. All right, I mean, I want to just switch back to the disc. So this is your district's management plan. Obviously, I realize I'm talking too much. I don't want to take any more time. Everybody's starting to yawn. But this is included, this document is available, and as you can see on the folders, you're going to see periodic surveillances, the custodial maintenance training, as well as short-term worker notifications. All of that material is documented in here. Now this, keep in mind, this document was created in 2016. In 2019, we'll go over the last 3 years of all these new documents that were generated. They'll be scanned, they'll be deposited back in these files, and then updated books will be presented inside each of the main offices as well as the designated person's office. So it's an extremely detailed report with a lot, it's 30 years of data for a lot of building materials in every single space inside the district. So it is a complicated document, but it's been extremely effective, and I think it's being utilized properly by the maintenance staff, and certainly with the architects and engineers during bond projects.
We're going to have the board ask questions first, and then we'll turn it over to community questions. So, Rachel?
Thank you. I thought I knew a lot about asbestos, and I feel like I just learned even more just now. I think you're about to get a lot of questions, but I suspect that the main question in everybody's mind is, are we doing absolutely everything we can and should be doing to make sure that the students and teachers are safe?
The answer is yes. Before 10, 12 years ago, we would do the HERA inspections because I didn't feel comfortable doing them based upon the standard that was out there. About 10 years ago, I came up with a new product, providing the one that you see today, and we've implemented it in school districts. And as of 15 years ago, we did 2 districts, now we do over 98. And we're finding that this product has been audited, been inspected, and we're very comfortable with it. And I do find that Port Washington is one of the very proactive, has taken a proactive. There's a lot of cost that goes into this, and a lot of effort, a lot of work, and we found that this is providing the best possible product as far as asbestos safety in the school district. So I feel very comfortable with it, yes.
I just have one follow-up on that too. You noted that the asbestos has to be classified as in good condition or damage or significant damage. Is all of our asbestos-containing material currently categorized as good condition?
For the most part, the good condition is kind of, we've broken it into 2, because there's good condition is something no damage or minor damage. And the idea is that when we do the re-inspections and the surveillances, if we identify something of significant damage, and that, again, that's vast, if that were to occur, we would call Mr. Ostavo that night. We'd call him on his cell, we'd say, we found this condition in this space, we recommend we would close the space down that night to make it non-explosive. So we're not finding that. If that has found, I can't recall if that's happened in the last 3 years or not, but I don't recall that it has. If we find something in a damaged state, then we would do, because that's not necessarily a meaningful amount, but it's something that should be concerned with, that we would make an immediate investigation of that. Usually that would encompass an air sample. Everything else is either done as what we call good condition, which is no damage, or very minor damage that's not a concern for release. Those get put into a priority list, and as you've seen with all those folders, based upon our concern, we systematically work on that to repair or to make sure that there's absolutely no damage.
So the threshold for action is something falling out of a good condition, noting, however, that you can have very minor damage and still be considered.
Right. Yeah, because minor damage, and again, to us, I don't want to say that there's no damage, and somebody says, what about this nick? You know, that could have happened 25 years ago. And the reality is that that is not resulting in a meaningful discharge of this. It hasn't lost its cohesion factor. Again, it's like, we're looking at damage by visual, but it really comes down to, is it releasing asbestos fibers into the air? And the only way that we can really determine that, once again, is to take those air samples. But we do use that visual guidance that was given by the EPA as saying, so once we see anything of damage, we would investigate significant damage, we would close the space down.
Thank you. I think we'll open up to the community now. Does anyone have any comments? I think it would be best, it would be we'll trade the microphone back and forth as needed. Thank you.
Hi,
If you could just identify yourself
yes.
for the record, everyone, thank you.
Sure. Regina McLean, President of Port Washington Teachers Association. I just wanted to thank you for bringing Broderick here today and for allowing us to ask questions. I do have a few questions. Regarding some of the classrooms at Schreiber, currently we know that there have been some rooms where white debris has been falling. They're in all different locations in the building, but I'm just wondering if Mr. Broderick can clarify what the composition of the ceilings are in those classrooms.
Are they asbestos containing? Yeah, all the surface material has been identified, and again, based upon, I can't say exactly which space, but it's on at the lower level. We have identified that they are identified in the building management plan as being asbestos containing.
I wanted to make sure that they were confirmed asbestos. So in these rooms where the debris has fallen, in your professional opinion, is the white debris coming from the ceiling?
Whenever there is a concern, like we say, so we're not obviously significant damage because it's not 25% of the room that's damaged. It's not even in the damaged condition because we don't see anywhere where there's more than 3 square feet. So the first assessment is to make determination whether that determination of the damage exists where a meaningful amount of asbestos could be released. That is not the case in those spaces because we don't see the damage. Where the dust, or I would call it dust, that's coming into place is we don't know where it is. And to err on the side of caution, we do that investigation that we discussed over the first part, is that we're going to look to see, take a look at the dust, the presence of the dust, and investigate to see if it's asbestos containing. So in the number of times that we responded to this, only 2 of the times was there enough dust or debris that we were able to actually collect a sample. There is a minimum amount of sample, I can't remember, it's 5 grams maybe, that needs to be collected in order for us to analyze it using a methodology called polarized light microscopy. Only twice during the investigation were we able to identify enough of the material to analyze. In both those instances, the material came back as not asbestos containing. In the other instances, when we tried to collect the sample, they dissolve, or they basically, there's just not enough material to collect a homogeneous material to submit for analysis. So our next concern is, since I can't identify whether the debris is asbestos or not, we're back to the whole purpose of seeing if there's any airborne release, any fibers in the air. In other words, is this causing an asbestos exposure? Each of the times that we tested it, we had it analyzed, sampling, that we did not identify a hazardous asbestos exposure in any of the classrooms. So at this point, we're not sure where the material is coming from, whether it's coming from the wall, the ceiling, but whatever it is coming, wherever it is coming, it's not resulting in a hazardous exposure condition inside the classroom.
Okay, do you recall the time they did the testing, do you recall what the test results came back as what the composition of that material?
When you use the polarized light microscopy, it would come back, basically they're going to identify whether asbestos is present or not, and then they give a general description of whether it's quartz, cellulose. I don't recall. Unless it's vermiculite, I don't recall, I wouldn't remember.
I recall it was calcium carbonate, which would be the material in plaster. Yeah, okay. And so we know that there is a plan to do something with these ceilings, to encapsulate the ceilings? Yeah, okay, so we're hoping that we'll get the white debris to stop falling. Okay. So could you just explain what encapsulate you'll use?
An encapsulation is one of the, like we mentioned, what we should say is basically, as of today, all the testing that we've done, and we've done extensive amount, we're not identifying a hazardous exposure assessment condition in the United States. With that said, if you remember the charts that we find, identifies the surface material, what the damage is, and the next one is determining the potential for damage. So obviously, the building is somewhere around 80 years old. So as far as physical damage, like the likelihood of somebody through traffic and doing normal use of the building, is it going to disturb it? That's not likely to exist, because I figure if it was a high traffic area that would cause a lot of damage after 85 years, we would have already sustained that damage. The only possibility of concern that we have is potential for damage is thinking about the general age of the material itself. All building materials have recalled the use of the useful life, where how long we should expect something to last, whether it be a roof, plumbing, and including ceiling plastic. So although the condition of the material now is not resulting in damage or significant damage, I do have a concern that maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, maybe 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road, that we might come upon that end of useful life. So what I would recommend, and what I have recommended to the district, is that we start taking consideration of addressing that, or maybe putting a plan into effect on abating these materials in a progressive manner, just moving forward. Now, the problem with abatements is that it's time consuming. It's extremely time consuming. Frankly, like a lot of abatements, like you mentioned, I just recall that one that we showed at Weber School. We were supposed to be done with that on Saturday, and because of those failures, that went into Sunday, and actually we were unable to take the containment down for the school on Monday. So in order to do like an asbestos abatement removal of that material, in one room or 2 or 3 rooms, it's more than a room, it'll take weeks. It's not something that can be done on a weekend, not something that can be done during a spring break. So it would have to be something where the building's not occupied. So since the abatement would take, a removal would take a while, we're looking to explore another possibility of what we call encapsulation. And encapsulation is basically covering it with an encapsulant which fortifies the material. And the idea is that we're strengthening the material. And maybe that would give us an opportunity to give us a few more years out of the product. So the encapsulation, we did go to the New York State Department of Labor. We identified the project. We asked for a variance of assistance of how we could do this so that we can actually implement it in at least the 3 classrooms over this spring break. And the idea is that we can monitor it and see if that comfort level is there. And maybe that's something, if it does work out and we are comfortable with it, it might be an alternative to abatement or removal, but we can actually encapsulate it instead.
The question was, what encapsulant will you use?
The actual type, that is being, the means and methods is determined by the contractor. They're provided, that the information has to be provided to us before the start of the abatement project. We have to get the safety data sheet and everything. I don't think we have that.
At a later date. And how long do you think this encapsulant will actually last?
That's going to be something that we're going to have to determine. Yeah, we're going to have to see.
Okay, and then you mentioned something about the encapsulant that suggests that it's possible that it won't work. So if it doesn't work, what would be your recommendation for how to proceed with those rooms if the encapsulant doesn't work?
Just to reiterate, as of right now, the rooms are in good condition. They're in that good condition category. But I can't tell the future. If this was a roof and it was leaking, maybe 1 leak you're okay, 2 leaks not. This might be an indication of a future condition. So I would recommend that the school district start identifying, like we have identified where we do know where the friable asbestos exists inside the classrooms and the occupied portions. I would recommend starting a proactive plan together where we can start planning abatements and try to get ahead of any time before it happens to become significant or significantly damaged. So, but again, we have to come up with a plan on what rooms we can do during what breaks, et cetera, et cetera.
And early in the year, you did some work in room 10 as well as some other rooms. And you mentioned earlier the air monitoring. And so when you did the air testing in room 10 or any of the other rooms, what kind of air testing is it that you perform?
We do what we call phase contrast microscopy and transmission electron microscopy, both PCM and TM.
Is this agitated air testing?
Aggressive methodology, aggressive methodology
For the actual abatement projects, yes.
I'm just asking because sometimes depending on the technique that's used, if it's a small minor tent, like a minor project, it's not going to be used because if you put the fan and blower on inside a small tent, you're going to be blowing the asbestos out of the tent. So for the small projects and large projects, it is the clearance criteria that prior to the clearance, so in those examples where at the end, it's called aggressive air sampling. Basically what we do is we go in, we set up a 20-inch fan, it's pointed towards the ceiling, and then we also walk in with the leaf blower. Then when you do the leaf blower, you agitate it for a certain period of time based upon the quantity of footage of the abatement area, and then afterwards you turn on the fan. So aggressive air sampling is always conformed to clearance criteria when required.
So in this instance, it wasn't required, so it wasn't done? Okay, so it isn't,
There were some, sorry, there were some of the containments that were small sized, which did require the aggressive air sampling, and in those cases, aggressive air sampling was performed. Ambient air sampling, which was not done after an abatement activity, but was done as a quality assurance, aggressive air sampling was not performed. Again, there's no containment to perform it.
it's not done all the time? Okay.
Terminated, we follow Code Rule, New York State Industrial Code Rule 56, and it's very specific, like on air sampling. Like when you collect the sample, when you're supposed to, when you turn it on, when you do aggressive sampling, when you do not. Like for instance, on a minor containment or no containment area, you're not required, you're not supposed to collect it. But on a small or large, you will. So depending, this had multiple containments, some are small, some are minor, some have none, so whichever one required, that's the one.
And before you do the air testing, can you just discuss what the exact procedure is for cleaning?
There's all multiple different containment areas. So for instance, if there's a full containment where there's multiple layers, it's like a multiple process. So I really have to set it on a tent, but typically what they would do is that any surface areas, they would use wet wiping and HEPA vacuuming on those surfaces.
And when debris is found in one of the rooms, who does the cleaning?
The cleaning up, someone doing the abatement or? No, we're not an abatement contractor, so we're not, if I remember, you saw the license, we have restricted, so we're strictly consultants, so we're not allowed to do the cleanings. So any work of the remediation, if it's an asbestos project, has to be done by a licensed abatement contractor using certified workers, which in those cases, again, we would collect the licenses and the certificates.
Is there a wait time between the cleaning process and the air sampling?
Yes, there's settling and waiting periods, again, depending on if it's a friable job, whether it's full containment, it could be anywhere from 12 to 42 hours. Depending on the size of the project, the quantity of materials being removed, the type of materials being removed, the containment, whether it's a special project, will dictate what proper waiting or settling time is appropriate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's important for me to identify myself. My name is Albert Miller, MD. I have relatives and friends who both teach and go to school here at Schreiber, so I feel a certain closeness with this building and with the people who occupy it. I am a professor of medicine, pulmonary and occupational medicine at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine, and since my first year there, which was in the year 1959, I have been involved with asbestos disease and problems related to asbestos, and have published at least 50 papers about this. So I'd like to amend a few things that you heard. You heard a rather appealing list of uses of asbestos over the years. And there's no question that if it were not hazardous, this would be a very desirable material. Much of the reason why asbestos was so widely used is that the hazards from it were hidden or denied by the companies that mined and manufactured the products. So if those things were not denied and hidden. It would not have been so widely used until the evil effects became too apparent to hide and deny. And you also heard how levels of fibers are quite low nowadays, and that's exactly because the vast uses that you heard have all been banned. So in the 60s and 70s, hundreds of tons, millions of tons of asbestos were used in the United States, imported from Canada, from Russia, from Brazil.
Sir, I'm sorry, we really wanted this to be a question and answer period. We had our,
Okay, so let me ask you.
so if you wouldn't mind trying to wrap it up because we want to get to the other
I
questions.
think it was important to point out that the uses of asbestos today are virtually none. Every one of the products you heard is no longer containing asbestos. The only real use is in manufacturing a chemical called chloralkali. So my questions are, if you have the ceiling which is shedding some flakes or dust, has that ceiling ever been looked at intact? A sample of that ceiling ever been analyzed so that you're not dependent on the weight of the dust that you collect? And if that ceiling does not contain asbestos, then you don't have an asbestos hazard from the debris. And the same thing goes for the piping that is present.
Sir, I'm really sorry. Please just stick to questions.
Yeah,
so we
the
can't do
question,
late.
the question is about the material constituting the surface of the piping.
Yes, both the pipe insulation and the ceiling material that it is tested. It was tested and confirmed to be asbestos-containing material, and that's what's reflected in the management plan for those spaces.
My name is Joy Grasso-Krebs, and I am the first vice president of the Port Washington Teachers Association, as well as the district health and safety chair. And the Port Washington Teachers Association would like to thank the Board of Ed. We'd like to thank district administrators, Mr. Rustano, all of you who have decided to resolve this most serious asbestos issue in our high school. I have to say this, that generations of children have passed through those rooms and will continue to pass through those rooms. So we have teachers who have been champions, teachers who have been champions to ensure the health and safety of students and staff. My question is, regarding your presentation, Mr. Broderick, and I know your first name is Brendan, yes. The Department of Labor Representative Paul told me of his exceptional reputation, but he also described the work of Branch as sloppy. Have you toured the rooms that are in question in terms of the abatement that is coming up now?
Yes.
And your impression of what has been repaired and what will be repaired?
I'm really sure I understand the question.
The Department of Labor called it sloppy. We know that report is not out yet, it's coming. Why do you think the Department of Labor would characterize the work that Branch has done in Schreiber to this point as sloppy?
I'm going to start with there's a couple of topics, the contractors. I'm not going to sit here and defend any contractor, okay? That's why we're here, is because this is one of the very few disciplines, because of the seriousness of asbestos, where we have to be separate from them. So if I had an asbestos abatement in my house that I needed to do, under the Code Rule 56, I could do it myself legally, I would do it myself. So the question is the contractor's duty, but not just Branch. I believe every contractor needs oversight. When it comes to sloppy, I think the definition is the finished product of how it looks. With the idea of what the intention of what the abatement, what was to be done there, was just to wrap what we call lagging around the materials to make it stronger. In other words, again, it all comes down to the release of these. Is it possible for the asbestos fibers to release? So the lagging put around it was put on, it's strengthening that bond, it's strengthening the material. It just, because it's in a public space, it's not attractive. Now, that's another part down, it's like, that's not the requirement of that, they're not gonna go that extra step to make it look good. And two, we do have a limitation, when we do abatements. That's why, two things, the EPA says don't do the abatements because there's a chance that it can cause more damage than good. And second, we have a limited amount of time. Once that job starts, I have to deal with that until it finishes. So the idea is that I don't have the time and the luxury to have you make it look more attractive at that point. Because if we did it, we extended it into the school period, we've lost the opportunity. So our responsibility, and what we did as the third party, it is sloppy, it's not attractive, it wasn't looking. Could they have done a better job making it look, especially being an occupied space? Yes, but that's not really my goal there. My goal is to make sure it's safe. So based on that, when we look at the inspection at the end, is it covering? Is it maintaining what it was intended to do? Yes. And then at the end, we take those air samples to make sure it's safe. So, I can't be up here to defend contractors. My whole purpose is to watch them, make sure they do it right, and we do our job well. The reason why I have a relationship with Mr. Valera is because if I'm not happy, just as you saw on that with the contractor, how a job is going, we will call him up and say, we need you to come down here and get this documentation. And we've done that to Branch, but we've done that to every contractor.
Ms. Krebs, may I just interrupt you for 1 second to qualify this with a question? The board was also told about these comments, and we did ask Mr. Rostano to look into it, and we were sure that while nobody wants to have work that looks sloppy, that there were no violations on that inspection by that same gentleman that said it looked sloppy. That's correct, right? Yes, Ms. Krebs? Okay, thank you.
And I have to give you a little bit of heads up that I'm a chemistry teacher, so I was taking notes during your presentation. I don't find it light at all to give a history lesson regarding asbestos and not including the facts, and I'm asking you if you agree with this, and Dr. Miller alluded to it, that asbestos companies knew that asbestos caused cancer, and there were many companies that did hide it, tens of billions of dollars set up for class action suits for people who developed lung cancer related issues. My father being one of them, he was the owner of a Meineke muffler, and he cut asbestos bricks. So do you concur that that was missing from your presentation to this community?
I think the idea of saying that it's a carcinogen, I didn't downplay that, and I'd have to agree with you. I share that. The company name is J.C. Broderick and Associates. I'm Brendan Broderick and Associates. I named the company after my father, who was a stationary engineer, somebody who worked in power plants his whole life. So I grew up in my latter years, with people, friends of my family that we've grown up that also have passed away with asbestos-related diseases. As a matter of fact, I called the company name J.C. Broderick and Associates so that it reminds me that it's not just me, I'm representing my father who also suffered from asbestos diseases. So it wasn't, I didn't think it was necessary. I think we all knew that asbestos is a hazardous substance and a carcinogen. But just to make sure all the facts that I presented up there are all from the ATSDR document, which I included in the package. But I didn't intentionally omit anything. I just kind of assumed that we all knew that asbestos is a hazard.
I've just been going to interject again that I just want everyone in the community to know that Mr. Broderick gave us a presentation and we felt that it was so thorough and he was so open to questions and so clearly forthright that we thought it would be a good thing for the community to have him come and be able to ask questions and have him answer them, and he did. He doesn't have to be here. He's doing this because he understands the concern in our community and our school district. So I hope we can all maintain the respect he deserves for being here tonight to do this for us.
Hi, my name is Megan Harding, and I just want to thank the board for giving us this opportunity to hear from J.C. Broderick and looking into this very serious asbestos issue at the high school. I'm PWTA Health and Safety Rep for the high school. I've been employed here in the district for over 20 years. I have personally and professionally been affected by the white debris that has been falling in the classrooms on the ground floor. I know you mentioned you're going to encapsulate on those rooms. Specifically, I think you said room 8, 10, and 11. My question is it possible the encapsulation on that ceiling that was described would be too heavy for the asbestos ceiling to do?
Actually, it is a possibility. Not that encapsulation is not popular, mainly because the cost is still to contain it. So most people do opt for the removal instead of the encapsulation procedure. But again, time-wise, we don't have the time to do multiple classrooms on removal. So there is a possibility that when you have a material, that when you add an extra weight of the encapsulant now, that it can pull onto it and cause it to delaminate. We mentioned this as a possibility, something that we're going to have to monitor carefully. If this was something that we saw that was delaminating, in other words, the material, because the material, the asbestos plaster is going to absorb the material, it is going to be distributed into it, increasing the bond of it. If we had saw that this material was delaminating from the substrate, like the cohesion was being disturbed at that point from the base down, then we wouldn't recommend it at all. But because it's not, there's a good chance that it will work. So just like I said before, we're going to monitor it carefully. At this point, we're just trying to make people feel more comfortable in the space. So I felt that taking this encapsulation, monitoring it would be more of a benefit than to do nothing at this point.
I appreciate that. I just had a meeting on January 17th with Tara from J.C. Broderick, who told me the ceilings would be too weak and they would crumble if we encapsulated them. Could you tell me the difference between a Category 1 and a Category 5 in your logbook?
With the classification? All right, so the classification, I don't have it memorized, but it's breaking into three different things, whether or not it's a surfacing material, thermal system insulation, or miscellaneous. So I believe one is, so number one is going to be damaged, significantly damaged thermal system insulation. So this is not even distinguishing between that 3 square feet and the 1025. What was the other one? 5. So 5 is asbestos-containing material with potential for damage. So if we classify something as not being damaged or significantly damaged, in good condition or minor damage, then the next part is to come up with its potential for damage. So 5 would be something that's no damage or minor damage, but has some potential for damage. And that's usually anything that's in a public occupied space.
Okay, thank you, because the logs that you'll hear us say they are Category 1, which is damaged and significantly damaged. Over the February break, there were 22 abatements that took place in this building. Room 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, 104, 114, 115, 117, just to name a few. In room 8, 10, and 11, we use the encapsulation method, and to this day, we're still seeing the white debris fall. So I'm just concerned about this new method we're going to take.
In those spaces, that was the lagging in the pipe insulation. That was not the application of on the ceiling. So that's what we're looking to do. Hopefully, make it more comfortable.
Just a couple more questions. In room 10, you used black tape on some of the Category 1 pipe insulations to hold the asbestos wrap in place. Is that a typical technique that is used? Because that's the only room that was used in out of 22 abatements.
Just clarifying, it's not you, not the contractor. So again, we're actually with the contractor, because it happens a lot of times I get the heat from the contractor, and I'm actually the one on top of it. So at the end of the day, they ran out of material. You mentioned all those different places we're going around. They took it upon themselves to put that. It's not typical. But there is, truthfully, purpose of it is there's nothing wrong with it. Again, it's not professional, it's not the best, it's not wrong, it's just not attractive. Again, why would they do it that way? So long-term wise, we want to see the lagging on that, but the tape is not what we typically recommend or require on a full-term project. we're not happy with it, but once it's on, I can't tell them to rip it off, because now, again, we're put in a bad position. So, it was probably just a poor decision made at the time, but it's nothing hazardous, it doesn't cause any damage.
Ms. Harding, it came to our attention, the concern about the black tape, and when we held a meeting with Regina McLean and Jim Rustano, Mr. Rustano is going to address that and have a change.
Thank you. I just had another question about the abatement sign that was hung on the front door, again, Beaver Branch. It says that the abatements will take place between April 23rd and June 1st in rooms 8, 10, 11. Will those rooms be offline for the remainder of the school year?
We hope not. In other words, we're not expecting it to be that way. Contractors that they're required to put the specific start date. Obviously, you never know on an end date, so they always go a little bit overboard on it, so that they're not caught being short. So we're anticipating that work will be completed before the end of the spring break.
And last question, how much exposure does someone need to asbestos fibers to contract the disease?
That's dependent on a lot of factors. Like, for instance, one big one, smokers. If you're a smoker and you're exposed, you're allowing your body defense is down, which makes you susceptible to more fibers. So all I can, again, I'm not a doctor, and if I was a doctor, I still would have to diagnose you based upon a bunch of different parameters. But based upon the ATSDRs, what they were saying, that the studies have shown that most of the people who come down with asbestos-related diseases have been exposed to 5 million fibers an hour during their work careers. So that, that's substantial. Again, I don't bring that stuff to minimize it. This is my career, this is what we got into it, is because we want to make it safe. I'm actually bringing these numbers and discussing this just to make you feel a little bit more comfortable. Again, we're exposed to concentrations every day. We're exposed at such we would think that we will be exposed. So I'm just trying to make sure to have everybody have a comfort level that you have somebody independent. The school district is monitoring it, and we're doing everything reasonably possible above and beyond what the regulations require in this district to make sure that there's levels that the potential exposure is as minimal as possible. I agree with you. Again, I'm concerned on that potentially. What does it mean in the future? These materials are getting old. The building is getting old. Not only are these materials getting old, but the roof and everything around it. So it's just taking a more proactive approach of evaluating these fiber materials in the classrooms and start getting maybe put a plan where we can start addressing them on the date. This whole idea of putting the caps on is trying to see if this is a solution that makes everybody comfortable as well as being scientific improvement.
All right, thank you. And if the board at any time would like, I have a binder full of all logs and pictures and information that I've obtained over the past 4 months with everything I've gone through in terms of this asbestos in the building.
We'd like to try and wrap up. Are there more questions? If we can try and limit each person a little bit more, because we do have more to the meeting and we'd like to go.
I'll make this quick. My name is Chris Murphy. I've been teaching for many years. I want to thank you for opening this up to everybody. Thank you for all of the great information. I have 2 questions. The first one is, how many different contracting agencies have you employed? Yes. Oh, excuse me. How many contracting companies have you been affiliated with in this district? A dozen. And have you considered hiring perhaps a more professional company?
There's a lot of questions to answer that. Right. No, I'm not. There's a lot of explanations. We don't, first of all, we don't hire contractors. In other words, the school district will, and they're, I can't be, there's no 20 Wicks law. We don't have any control of who the contractor is that's on the project. The only way we can disqualify a contractor if we find them to be completely incompetent, and to prove that would be based upon violations, and every contractor has violations. There's not a contractor out there that doesn't have it. So we're bound by municipal laws on who they can hire as a contractor. Sometimes they hire a general contractor and have no control who they use as a subcontractor as well. So that's why the need for us is greater than, trust me, I wish I could pick.
So it really sounds to me like contracting is the biggest problem. Because we're all on the same page. We all want things to be better. We want it to be healthy and safe.
At the end, if we're finding something where the conduct's being egregious and it's not safe, that's when we call in the Department of Labor. They will come in and close the job. It's just a who's had work done in their house? Who loved their contractor? You know, nobody. Okay, you only got one. So nobody's on, and that. So I don't want to be unfair to the contractors. It's just that, of course, we always wish somebody could do a better job.
George Borda, parent, 5th grader. First of all, I want to thank Ms. McLean, Teachers Association, for being on top of this. It's a very important matter. I just want to state that investigators from the National Cancer Institute have found asbestos-related diseases in individuals with only brief exposures. Also, for the record, the United States remains one of the only developed nations in the world that has not banned asbestos. I guess the worry for a lot of us parents is the future of our kids. It takes about 10, 40, 80 years for the disease to appear. So, something to keep in mind and understand why so many parents are so concerned. I see my kid go to this school. I want it to be a safe place. Thank you.
Was there another question? Did you have a question? No.
I'll make this brief. The question I have is when testing is typically done in school, what is the actual value? How does that compare to the OSHA value? In other words, are we always right up next to that? And then do you know what is the ambient? So if you go outside, so kind of like if you could compare outside typical asbestos value, measured value in our schools, and if you can remind me, like hearing the numbers, what is the typical kind of safe limit that we want to compare those numbers to? And I'm sorry, John, I think I was thank you.
Okay, the clearance is established on 2 levels. On the federal level, it's using the transmission electron microscopy, which is volume-based. So that's 70 structures per millimeter squared. I don't know off the top of my head where that goes into fibers per cubic centimeter, but that's the criteria. You're allowed to have 70 structures per millimeter squared. Again, that was where when I put it to that value of the ambience that we got, comes out to about 22,000 fibers per meter cube. The New York State Department of Labor has a more stringent criteria, which is 0.01 fibers per cubic centimeter, as a clearance criteria, where the OSHA limit is 0.1 fibers per cubic centimeter. So the OSHA limit is 0.1, our clearance is 0.01 for the school, so it's definitely more stringent.
I just want to thank you again for coming and the presentation and answering some of the questions. And I just want the school district and community to know that the board is committed to the children's safety and the staff's safety. But there are a lot of things by which we're bound with following regulations, and if things don't test a certain way, and we have financial limitations. So we are trying to embark upon a proactive plan going forward, but it's going to take years. So everyone is going to have to try to understand that any situation that becomes dangerous, we will of course rectify it in as speedy and careful a way as we can, following all the regulations, but in a proactive way going forward to do a few classrooms at a time. It's all throughout the district. It's going to take years and years and years. So we need to all work together and be patient and try to find good answers and good avenues to explore, like the latest encapsulating solution, so that it's buying us some time. It's not a long-standing solution. It's not going to last forever, but it's going to make it better and safer and stop all of the investigating and feeling nervous about what's happening, but that's short term. So we're trying to figure it out. And we appreciate that you are, of course, nervous about this, and we appreciate your coming tonight to ask the questions and to communicate with us, but just know that we're concerned too. So it's not that we don't want to, if we could, we'd go and take all the asbestos out of the entire school district, but we just can't do it that way. Yes. Yes.
I just want you to know that all of the teachers are on the same page with you and that we're willing to be flexible. If that means switching classrooms for a semester, something, we're all willing to work together to make it safe. You just all have to be a little flexible and transparent. Thank you so much.
And now, okay, now we're going to move on with our agenda. Okay, committee meetings, policy and personnel. Who is that? Emily.
We met last week. We worked on the wording of policy 1241, which is community development organizations. Policy 1240 under the schools is on the board tonight. We did review policy 1200 for the involvement, and our next meeting is on May 8th. We will be discussing the website.
Thank you. Budget and facilities. Beth, is there anything else to talk about?
Only that our next meeting will be May 7th at 8:30 a.m. We can sort of start focusing a little bit more on our facilities conversations again, now that the budget has been adopted, so we anticipate a robust update on our facilities projects.
And curriculum,
Curriculum, we met this last Friday, and we had a discussion on the E&L program in Port Washington, and how we're doing it with a very student population of students, and how our program is actually a model for a lot of other districts, and other districts basically coming to see how we've been doing it. And I know we always say that we're the best with this situation. I don't think we're actually being hyperbolic about it. So anyway, we do have a great program that reaches a lot of kids, and we have very good success rate with it. Our next meeting is May 31st, and it will be on esteem. And we will announce where it's going to be, because we're going to try to have it in one of the new esteem rooms if they're ready and up and running.
thank you. I'll now move to the action items. Ms. Callahan, do I have to pull anything? No. Items A1 through D18A. Do I have a second? I'm going to let Mr. Gerber be the second because he's still here. All in favor? 7-0, thank you. I would just like to thank the Manor Haven PTA for their generosity in helping with restoring and bringing new equipment to Manor Haven Playground. And we have board policy for the first reading, policy 1240, visitors to the schools. You can read it whenever you want. Old business. New business? Does anybody else want to talk to us? All righty.
Earlier, I was trying to follow the rules. I didn't want to make a statement. I was just asking questions. So I just wanted to say that we really are so happy that you're putting money in the budget next year to address the asbestos situation at Schreiber, and the Teachers Association looks forward to continuing to work with you to continue to resolve this and other health and safety problems. So thank you.
Thank you. There is.
I do, John Supervisor, I do want to note that I asked the contractor who measures the asbestos value in our area a specific question: what was the typical value? And he responded with the basic OSHA limits and what is the limit in schools. So he totally dodged the question. I wasn't asking about the contractor. So maybe it was a difficult question because it probably varies from school to school, but I do think it's important that it was that whole 50 or 30-minute presentation about all the paperwork, the fundamental question, what is the levels in our school, is not answered. And that bothers me some, because that's fundamentally what everyone wants to know. What is it safe? Where are the values? That's what he's getting paid to do.
Thank you. If there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Our next meeting, by the way, is May 7th, which also happens to be the meeting where we will celebrate those members of our staff who are receiving tenure.